Hello, this is the Final Boss, and this is Recurrence. This is a viewer-submitted story. I already started reading a little bit, so my biggest summary, my biggest note so far was starting with summary instead of scene. And so I read a little excerpt from James Islington to say, hey, this is like what, a modern book will usually start with, an active scene with something happening in the moment that's simple enough to be understandable, right? Like you can kind of go in and know, oh, this guy's getting attacked, he's in a combat scenario or whatever, something tense is going on. Admittedly, this is getting a little bit overdone, but, it's kind of with how much distraction there is now for readers, sinking a hook very early is almost a must-have in this current world. But yes, so the object of research, artificial black holes, they were beyond simple simulations. This test would be the moment of truth. So again, you're summarizing this. This is like pulled out. Like this is like if I was reading it in a textbook, right? The way you express that in a scene and zoom in is through, check 5, confirmed. Check 1, confirmed. Are you ready, sir? We should still do more simulations. No, we've spent so much of our government's money that we have to figure this out tonight. But sir, no, don't question me. Press the black hole button. Whatever that is. Obviously that's like a kind of a silly version. But that's giving us, even that silly version, the context. This is a big moment. They've built up towards it. And it starts with an argument, right? There's two people with different goals. One person wants to do more simulations and tests. The other person is ready to press go and to, collect $200, whatever. So that's kind of at least what I would just keep your eye on. And I won't talk about it too much more because I talk about it in a lot of videos. But that will probably be a recurring theme because starting with very heavy summary, at least in the way people write today, like if you were in Charles Dickens' day, you could get away with some summary, but it also was like, very, very, very thoughtful summary, right? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, but then once he gets past that, like a paragraph later, he's right into this brawl on the street over a busted wine barrel. So like read, just read a bunch of first pages, read like 20 first pages. And, I have also a thing on my blog about using a highlighter to really help your writing process, breaking it down by the types of speech. It's in there somewhere. Let me go find it. I'll do a good job. Blog. I gotta write more blog posts. I've been a lazy Final Boss. I've not written blog posts because they take sweet, sweet time. And that is not something I have very much of, sadly. Alright, so we'll pop this over here. But yes, so this is essentially the blog where I talk about, like, hey, break out, what's the narrator? Like, because, like, this is all narrator, right? This would all be blue, right? Because this is a narrator is telling us a summary of what happened. It's not a scene-by-scene, so that, this would all be blue, right? And you'll notice that there's quite a bit of these other things. There's interiority, thoughts, there's dialogue, somebody saying something, action, somebody doing something, scene description. That's kind of how the prologue and James Islington start. Sound, smell, taste, sensory experience, and imagery. So there's all these types of things. And when you click, I don't know if this will work. Oh, it does. But you'll see how blended they are. And the blue is really coming in later, right? Like this is, I think the first page is up higher. I hope I did that. Yes, this is maybe the first, no. I don't know where it is. But but like you'll see the blue comes in later after we establish a scene. Food for thought. Anyways, for a split second, they had succeeded. There was an artificial black hole, but they might have succeeded too well. Although the size of the coin, it was way bigger than the theory and simulations had predicted. That's, things go awry when you try to carve a hole in reality. Don't do it. If you're in particle physics, no. We don't want it. We don't need to know it. Theory of disaster. In theory, a black hole, it's going to be more the editing side, but So this will be in video. Look into the balance of scene and summary. All right. And I can even look at. I'm gonna plug my own blog post. And do this for 5 books. 5 first chapters in books you like. Bam. How do I do this? Back. All right. In theory, a black hole with a diameter of a standard coin would have slightly more mass than the Earth itself. It would exert a gravitational force quadrillions of times more than Earth. True. Although the artificial black hole had dissipated after just a second, it would be an understatement if the effects were tremendous. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, even the moon itself removed from orbit, so it's all too sudden. Billions of casualties, trillions of dollars. Oh my gosh. And the moon falling from the sky to eventually end the world. Oh my goodness. So things are going south quickly. But again, we're not, because it's getting summarized, we can't feel it in the moment, right? And so, like, the things I would do is, and you'll see people do this, zooming into a particular moment when they're, like, flipping the switch. Like, that's, like, a crazy moment. Like, right? Like, I think one of the most interesting, things in Oppenheimer and in that movie is when, they're sort of, or even just in the situation that happened, is, there's a possibility that we really, really, destroy life when we press this button. It's not a big possibility, but it's a possibility. Should we do it? And, the people in the room said yes, and they went for it with nobody else's consent. They wanted to go crazy, like, so it's these types of things where you can really, get something, those moments I think are the ones people remember from the film, and they were in the trailer, right? Like, those are huge moments that matter. The world is back to 1400. So we're 1345. This time, no one present to conduct the experiment. The lab is empty. No damages. Something dormant has been disturbed. Infrastructure is working pursuing, but now living soul is seen in the lab, yet the memory of everything that has transpired is not gone. Everyone survived back where they were, with not so much as a scratch on them. It's almost as if the entire would have been back 13 minutes and 8 seconds if something's missing. Everyone who was killed during the 13 minutes is gone without a trace. Their existence is only marked by the memory of those who remember them. So it's a cool concept, but again, even in the Avengers, right, where everybody gets, Thanos snapped away, they're demonstrating, the impact. They have like a whole movie of, I think it was an Ant-Man one where he's just processing the loss of his daughter, and so there's a lot of, they're using like the snap to make a lot of stuff happen, right? Sorry, I was about to just write that. I wonder if we can experience the emotional moment, what this loss. It's a cool concept, though, that you, like, snapped forward and then snap back. On the ISS, 7 astronauts are trying to compose themselves with what they just witnessed. In the last 13 minutes, some are traumatized, some worry for their family. The commander is trying to contact a crew when a crew member says, "Hey, you've got to come look at this." Fearing the worst, his commander doesn't take the words of a veteran crew member lightly. The world was glitching. And so it's cool that you're using visuals and stuff as well. I think that's like a really, really great device. And that you're using different kinds of text. I think that's actually nice. And I think it's more, I would think that's more in a visual novel format, right? So if you send this to like a publisher, they'll probably want the raw, just words only, If you're doing, I think you said you were thinking about putting this up on Wattpad or those types of platforms. I think this is fair game, right? Like, because those kind of blend, to the best of my knowledge, they kind of blend between, sort of interactive media a little bit and, a book, and so this is actually, I think, a good direction to go. I like that you're using different colors, different styles. The thing I would just continue to think about is this is like the first time we get into the scene. And you know, obviously there's I think some spelling things to look out for, like this should be capitalized, this should have a comma. The commander trying to transfer, yeah. So again, the commander is trying to contact HQ. That's way pulled back. It's somebody distant in the scene. The way you would kind of write this, I think, in a way that might be a little bit more of a hook, would be to say, you know, the senior, stand down, the senior. You know, his first officer bent his head and waited while he placed another call. I don't know, what do they call Houston? Houston, do you read? Are you there? No. The line hissed, you know. Commander, please, you gotta look at this. And then instead of, summarizing his thoughts, this is another thing where summary can be really risky. And like one of the reasons everyone makes you read James Joyce, even though Ulysses is like an experimental book, one of the outcomes of that experiment was starting to move thought from summary into things like free and direct discourse and stream of consciousness. It was one of many people that did that. But that's when, instead of saying, he was worried this was going to happen, saying, reporting that person's thoughts, oh my gosh, what's happening? What's going on? Get me to the window. Even if that's his mental process, that could be stream of consciousness. Free and direct discourse, would be kind of a blend of the two. So again, the biggest thing I would say so far is that you're relying obviously there's issues in terms of like just basic grammar stuff. I think, going over this with Grammarly or whatever will help, obviously. But I don't think that's the most important feedback I can get, right? Like, you probably don't need a space before commas. But grammar is easy to fix, right? The things that you want to think about are in, whatever language I'm telling it in, whatever I'm doing, I want to make sure I'm telling a story as engagingly as I can. And whenever you're leaning on summary, it's going to put that at risk. It's going to slow it down. So let's go to chapter 1. Afternoon, 1300, 2 years prior. The inner hall of an inconspicuous tavern. There's a fully organized but definitely illegal fighting room, complete with a betting counter. From outside, no one would assume that this tavern gets much business, but on the inside, there's quite a crowd for this afternoon's quotation fight. For this afternoon fight, no, that's fine. That's fine. It's not a possessive. In one corner of the ring, a man named Hans Rucken. So again, we're pulled out. We're summarizing everything. The ways you might want to think is like, okay, 2 years prior to the world-altering incident. Oh my goodness, it's on like giant lingus mode. Why? So that I can say, the fighter, the champ hit the cage, and landed hard on the map. The crowd went insane when he spit out you know, I don't even know. I'm not even writing right. STOOD. I guess I'm struggle typing today here. Yeah, so the champ hit the cage wall and landed hard on the mat. The crowd went insane when he's so like we're starting with like a play-by-play, like that's why those football commentators, even though they're so weird, will be like, he kicked the center, blah 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 blah. Like they're giving the play-by-play. There's something really really engaging about a moment-by-moment description of a turn of events, and I think you probably want to be really thinking about, hey, if you want this to appeal to a broader audience, to like more people, that's just the storytelling more folks are used to. So it's up to you and your goals, right? If you say, hey, I want this to be summary, I want this to kind of read more in a distilled fashion, totally up to you. But I think like, if it was my project, those would be the places I would look first. Outside world, in the corner ring, a man named Hans Rockin. Again, last name. So again, coming from the narrative, that looks to be in his 30s. So, right, the narrator, and you're coming at it with an omniscient narrator, the person telling us the story. Like, that's whenever, that's another thing that makes writing in summary difficult. If someone is telling us the story, they are narrating it to us. Who are they? What do they know? Why do they know it? What's their angle, right? And so the fact that this narrator seems so far to be omniscient, he kind of just knows everything that's going on, is summarizing and organizing everything for us, says he looks to be in his 30s, means that he's not certain, right? Like, is the narrator not sure? If he's in his 30s, just say so. So again, those types of things where you're using more summary, you're kind of in that pulled out zone, it both has some impact on the pacing of the story. It will slow down pacing a little bit, but it will also kind of force you to ask a few more questions than you might expect, which is like, hey, well, who's the narrator? Why is he telling us this? Did he survive? Is he just some omniscient, pulled back narrator that's voiceless, faceless? Great, then he should never have any doubt about anything going on. Or at least, if he does, there needs to be a really good reason for it. Or like, where are we restricting the boundaries? Like, those types of things can be pretty impactful. Not really muscular, but not excessively fat either, and normal. So again, like, not really much. So this is going to be more of a description note. It's much harder for a reader to picture something that's been not described. So by describing through negatives, you're gonna weaken the impact of the description. It's harder for me to form the same picture as somebody else. Describing in the negative makes it hard for multiple form the same picture. The way it's really funny, right? Like the way I think about a lot of writing. Yes. Am I talking too loud? No. Apologies. Our little one was being very cute. We had to observe, which was very important. He was very cute. But I think if I'm remembering, this describing in the negative is hard. Um, so one corner of the ring. I would, the way you would maybe replace this is saying something like, in his mid 30s, in his 30s, with, rippling muscles over a hefty beer gut, whatever. But again, so that's giving us a sense. He's like pretty ripped on top, but he's got a huge gut. Like, okay, cool. At least it gives us a little bit more, within view things. A normal skinny man, even with a few gray hairs, and a worried look on his face. Wait, what? Not muscular, but not fat. Normal skinny man with a few gray hairs and a worried look on his face. And the other corner is a 5'7" male. Made up for him to utilize the full range of motion of his legs. So these things like the ITF variant of Taekwondo, I just don't know what that would mean. And so to some degree, I'm going to grab some water, but to some degree I would try to think about what are the terms what are the terms you want to define for the reader? And what are the ones you want them to kind of, just not worry about? Like, this is kind of a nitpicky point where it's like, oh, it's the ITF variant of Taekwondo, which is much more dating than WT. I don't really have much context to what that means in the story, right? And so, if I don't have the so you're saying, oh, hey, one can deduce that he's trained in this. How do you deduce that? So again, it's assuming a lot about the reader, and one of the goals in writing is sort of like an AI prompt. Like, essentially, reading a book is reading a really big AI prompt for your brain, right? And so if you're not specific enough, you can ask ChatGPT something, and it'll give you something totally different than what you meant. Similar deal. If you tell the human brain, this is the prompt, but we're missing specifics, or we're giving it a reference that maybe it doesn't know, like ITF variant in Taekwondo. ChatGPT obviously knows everything, so it probably know what that is. But a person, their AI thing might not, and so then it'll just say, I don't know, and it will not be able to get that context that you're trying to share, right? Because it's all about how do I communicate. How do I make someone have an experience I'm trying to give them through the story? And so, like, specific terms like this undescribed and used to make a point, like we're giving information, like, oh, hey, this is a dangerous fighter, might serve to, confuse the reader. But that's not what makes Han worried. How do we know? What worries him is the age of his opponent. The teenager on the opposite side doesn't look older than 17. Hans even considers going easy on the kid, but that thought leaves his mind. So, how do we know this? Again, like, it's, does he have a thought that, we hear that says this? Etc. Yeah, the kid leaps forward in the middle of the ring, performs a swinging back kick with perfect footwork, leaving no room for retaliation. Okay, so you're giving us some context here in parentheticals, which is cool. Like, I'm learning more about Taekwondo and Muay Thai. The issue is, sorry, I'm like starving to death. The issue is, it jumps us out of the story. Like, this is essentially an aside or a footnote. And it's also you referencing the story from an outside perspective. So, what are the... So again, like with anything in writing, there's pros and cons. So then what are the pros and cons? You'll see a lot of modern writing doing stuff like this, right? They're trying to experiment. A lot of modern writing will have footnotes. Like if you read Infinite Jest, you know, it has a ton of footnotes. And I personally didn't like it, but some people really did. But essentially, you know, that's kind of like flicking the neat reader in the nose. Like it's like, hey, hey, you know, and it, you know, which is, some readers appreciate that. They want kind of a jarring experience. But it has downsides. One of those downsides being is it pulls us out of the reality of the world, right? Like, you know, we're the person's AI, you know, like our brain AIs are putting a movie set together, right? We're trying to give a reader enough to make a little movie in their brain. And, you know, that's why it's really helpful to give concrete details and use props and scene description, because you're helping that person have an imagined experience and that you're trying to guide. When you jump out, you're reminding them, hey, this is make-believe. This is a story, we're imagining it, right? And so when you reference the story, like, hey, this is what just happened, this is blah, 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 especially talking to us directly as the reader, it's going to just call that fact into attention. That could be your intent. That could be your goal. Like you say, hey, at this point, I want to kind of like wake the reader up, make them feel a little bit of the artifice of what they're doing, which is like reading a story. That could be your goal. I think that more likely, given the way it's driving, and you also need to be... capitalizing last names. The sheer shock factor of this move leaves Hans unable to defend and he to be knocked down. Hans, unable to recover and get on his feet in the following 8 seconds, is declared the loser, the mysterious 17-year-old, hands tucked in his pockets. Alright. Afternoon, 1300, on the day of the incident. Okay. As usual, there's an afternoon match being held in the inner halls of the tavern, but this time, Hans isn't a competitor. He's a spectator cheering a particular boy he's grown to like in the past 2 years. Leaning on the wall by the betting counter, you know, it's changed a lot since he arrived. I suppose it really has. So I'm glad we're getting into dialogue. But the one thing I would flag is this is kind of hey, how are you dialogue. So I'll just read it aloud, and then we'll see what's happening. Okay. Leaning on the counter, Hans said, you know, this place has changed a lot in the last 2 years, ever since he arrived. I suppose it really has. A friendly voice from behind the counter replies, I never thought the day would come where we would have to change our business model from authentic fights to flashy performances. But don't get me wrong, Hans, it's not really a bad thing. After all, our audience loves this. Do you still remember his first match? How could I possibly forget? I still get reminded of it every time I try to lay down on my stomach each night. That back kick fractured 2 of my ribs and I was hospitalized for 2 months. Well, I think it's about time I gave the signal. Okay, so it's very, very rare in dialogue where someone will give context, especially to someone that already knows, right? It seems like the friendly voice behind the counter is already familiar with everything. Like, you know, don't you remember? Blah, blah, blah. You know, I mean, so one of the risks in dialogue like this is it will feel a little bit stilted. Hey, don't you remember your quest to destroy the dragon on top of the mountain? Yes, I just needed to, you know, get a magical sword named Shapoopy Poops first, and then I can go, you know, that's essentially a less efficient way to give exposition. In some senses, we already, actually, just from your first couple of lines, we just know that Hans is behind the counter and is saying this place has changed a lot in 2 years. I know everything. He's a spectator now. The kid's in the thing, blah, 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 blah. The boy is dodging every punch. Keon Kendux looks over and sees the owner of the tavern giving him a symbol, and then he knocks him out. Okay. Okay, and then the moment will happen. Okay. So he's going to see his mom 2 years prior. Okay, so we're jumping back and forth a lot in time, and so I like it. But you know, to some degree, I kind of want to get to the moment, right? Like the big moment. Like, okay, this person's, you know, going to see his mom, you know, and then this thing happens. The other thing I'd think about is because we're in summary, you know, you don't get as much leeway in terms of putting off the big moment. Like in a scene, you can have little conflicts, little distractions. Like in Home Alone, like you think about the Home Alone movie. Oh, thank you for the follow, Elka. Elka, blah, blah. Thank you. And welcome. But in the Home Alone movie, before he's ever home alone, there's still like the family's fighting and blah, 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 and we gotta get the tickets and blah, blah, blah. And there's all this stuff happening in scene that keeps us engaged and learning about the characters until the character's home alone. And then like the main inciting incident of the story starts and it evolves from there. So yeah, those would be kind of some of my thoughts. I think you have a really cool concept here. I love this idea of this like weird black hole that was opened up that somehow did a Thanos snap and rewind time. I think that's a very cool concept. My encouragement would just to be to really think through the page by page execution. You know what your goals are. And that's the thing. You can ignore everything I said if you say, hey, this is my goal. This is what I want it to be. You know, you're the writer. Like you do have absolute ownership over what you want this to be. But when you think about your audience, those are the places where hopefully some of the stuff we're talking about can help, right? We say, you know, for a more modern audience, I probably need to think a little bit more in terms of scene. When I'm bringing in dialogue, it might sound a little bit artificial if I'm using dialogue too much to give information. But yeah, and also just trusting your reader. Like I think you gave us such a good, you know, this was such a good intro with such good context. I didn't need, you know, the next few lines. I got that, you know, Hans was out of the game. You know, so like to some degree, like you'd already like trust your writing, right? And know that if you cue a reader like that and say, okay, Hans is leaning on the wall behind the counter. If you cue the reader like that, they're gonna get, he's not a fighter anymore. That was his big fight that he lost, and blah blah blah. And you don't necessarily have to recap it down here. But anyways, thank you so much for sharing this with me. I apologize it took me a little while to get to this, but for better or for worse, there is a long and fraught writing queue for Final Boss. And it's being filled by games as well now, which has been really fun because I love games and I love the writing in games. But it does slow my ability to get down through the free edit queue. But I hope this was helpful. Great job on the work. I think it's always like it's always such an accomplishment for someone to create something, for someone to put a story together and really think through it like that. I think don't trivialize that. I think no matter what where you go with the story, I think that's like a huge, fantastic thing. And yeah, I'm excited to see how it continues to evolve. I'm curious to see what these color indicators are. Not quite sure. But thank you so much for sharing this with me. I hope some of that feedback is helpful. And I'm excited to see what you come up with next. And if you share your revisions, feel free to share your revisions. Take care.